Welcome to the Dark Docket, the podcast where we explore the fascinating intersection of the law and the supernatural. I'm your host, Aidan, and today we're continuing to examine lawsuits that involve supernatural entities. The world can be a pretty unfair place, and some say that life itself should come with a buyer beware sign. With most products, if it causes us harm, we typically have the right to sue the creator or manufacturer of that product. But what happens when we, mere mortals, feel that we have been wronged by a higher power? As you will hear, the plaintiffs in the following cases did not just want to meet their makers, they wanted to see them in court. From frivolous to faithful, get ready to explore the ultimate David versus Goliath scenarios as we delve into lawsuits where plaintiffs have attempted to bring divine and demonic entities to justice. Before we discuss these quixotic quests, let's review our typical disclaimer. Nothing you hear on this show should be construed as legal advice. If you're facing a legal issue, please consult with a qualified attorney duly licensed in the appropriate state. Furthermore, while we strive for accuracy, we can't guarantee the complete historical validity of all facts and stories presented. Some details may be dramatized or simplified for narrative effect. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. But remember, we're here to spark your imagination, not to solve your ghostly legal disputes. Our first case takes us to Arizona, 1960. Picture this: a bolt of lightning strikes a house, causing a fire and significant damage. Something they call in the insurance industry an act of God. The homeowner, Betty Penrose, perhaps taking this expression a bit too literally, decides the culprit is none other than the Almighty himself. Skip forward 9 years later. Penrose is now living and working in Sonoma County, California, as a secretary for an attorney named Russell T. Tanzi. Tanzi decides to file a $100,000 lawsuit. That's $75,000 in general damages and $25,000 in punitive damages on Betty's behalf against God for negligence. The complaint read, "Plaintiff is informed and believes that defendant, God, at all times mentioned herein, is responsible for the maintenance and operation of the universe, including the weather, in and upon the state of Arizona, and that on or about August 17th, 1960, defendant so maintained and controlled the weather in, around, and upon Phoenix, Arizona, in such careless and negligent manner as to cause lightning to strike the plaintiff's house, setting it on fire and startling, frightening, and shocking the plaintiff." As a side note, I'm sure the pun was intended. But why file the lawsuit 9 years later and in a different state? Well, Tanzi was aware that about a month earlier, a man named Lou Gottlieb, the lead singer of the famous folk band The Limelighters, had recently transferred the deed of his Morningstar Ranch to God, making God a property owner in Sonoma County, California. Tanzi believed that this would help to establish jurisdiction over the divine defendant in the Sonoma County court. Tanzi's plan was to file the suit and then win a default judgment when God failed to manifest in court. Unfortunately for Penrose, the court ruled that God couldn't take possession of Gottlieb's property, and consequently, her lawsuit was dismissed, thus highlighting the challenge of establishing legal standing against a supernatural entity. A few years later, in 1971, Satan, aka the Prince of Darkness, found himself summoned not to a pentagram, but to a courtroom. Gerald Mayo, a 22-year-old inmate at Western Penitentiary in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, decided to take on the ultimate adversary in a legal battle. Mayo filed a civil rights suit against Satan and his staff in the United States District Court for the Western District of Pennsylvania. Mayo's complaint alleged that Satan had, on numerous occasions, caused plaintiff misery, and unwarranted threats against the will of the plaintiff, that Satan has placed deliberate obstacles in his path and has caused plaintiff's downfall. If God was not living up to his responsibilities in the Penrose case, Satan was absolutely knocking it out of the park in this case. The case, officially known as United States ex rel. Gerald Mayo v. Satan and his staff, presented some unique legal challenges. U.S. District Court Judge Gerald J. Weber, presiding over the case, approached the matter with remarkable judicial seriousness tinged with humor. In his opinion, Judge Weber first noted that the court faced significant issues regarding personal jurisdiction over the defendant. He wryly observed that, while no previous cases had been brought by or against Satan, there was an unofficial account of a trial in New Hampshire where this defendant filed an action of mortgage foreclosure as plaintiff. This was a clever reference to Stephen Vincent Benet's short story, The Devil and Daniel Webster. The judge went on to consider Satan's potential status as a foreign prince, which might entitle him to sovereign immunity. However, he didn't have the opportunity to rule on this point. Ultimately, the case was dismissed on a rather mundane technicality. Mayo had failed to provide instructions for how the U.S. Marshal could serve process on Satan. This highlights a crucial aspect of the American legal system, the requirement of proper service of process. Parenthetically, a local legend claims that Judge Weber's ghost haunts the 4th floor of the federal courthouse in which he served. Witnesses have reported seeing a black-robed figure, feeling cold drafts, experiencing unexplained elevator movements, and smelling cigar smoke. Could this be the spirit of the Honorable Judge Weber? Or did people ascribe these supposed paranormal experiences to the late judge simply because he oversaw a case that involved the supernatural? Judicial spirits aside, the question also remains, why did Mayo attempt to sue Satan? Well, it's possible that Mayo saw himself as a jailhouse lawyer, i.e., an inmate with no formal legal training who spends his time combing through law books, advising other prisoners, and putting together lawsuits. Jailhouse lawyers often seek release from prison, or at least amelioration of their circumstances, by exploiting obscure loopholes in the law, although their motions often prove unsuccessful. Around the same time Mayo brought his satanic suit, he joined a group of prisoners called the Imprisoned Citizens Union. They, along with prisoners in 3 other cases, sued Governor Milton Shapp of Pennsylvania, challenging the constitutionality of conditions and policies within the Pennsylvania prison system. On May 22, 1978, after those cases had been consolidated into a class action, a consent decree was approved, which settled the majority of issues raised by the plaintiffs. So, while Mayo might not have been a man of wealth and taste, we still remain puzzled by the nature of his game. Outside of the U.S., in 2005, we encounter a case that truly blurs the line between the sacred and the profane. A Romanian prisoner named Pavel Mircea, serving a 20-year sentence for murder, decided to sue the Romanian Orthodox Church. His claim? The Church, as God's representatives in Romania, had failed to protect him from the devil, and had also failed to answer his prayers. Mircea argued that his baptism was essentially a binding contract, and God had failed to perform on his side. He was supposed to stop Satan from convincing him to kill another person. The plaintiff also alleged fraud, abuse of authority, and misappropriation of goods. The plaintiff, along with other damages he was seeking, was also looking to recover reimbursement for the money he had spent on prayer candles. The court in Timisoara took 2 years to consider this divine dilemma before ultimately dismissing the case in 2007. Their reasoning? God is not a person in the eyes of the law and does not have an address. So, did Mircea honestly think he was going to prevail and receive the money back for his prayer candles? Probably not. It's possible that Mercia was actually trying to get the court to consider the state of his mental health in hopes that they would reconsider his prison sentence. Claims of being under the control of supernatural entities have often been raised to support the defense of not guilty by reason of insanity. But more on this later, as this is actually the topic we will be examining in the next episode of this season. These issues of being able to serve process and establish jurisdiction keep coming up and seem to shield paranormal entities from a fair amount of litigation. Our next case demonstrates a unique approach to circumventing this issue, though. Perhaps the most famous case of suing a supernatural being comes from former Nebraska State Senator Ernie Chambers. In 2007, Senator Chambers filed a lawsuit against God, seeking a permanent injunction against the Almighty's harmful activities. Chambers' complaint was quite detailed. He accused God of causing fearsome floods, egregious earthquakes, horrendous hurricanes, terrifying tornadoes, pestilential plagues, ferocious famines, devastating droughts, genocidal wars, birth defects, and the like. Apparently, Chambers forgot to add burning the roof of your mouth while eating hot pizza. The lawsuit further alleged that God had caused widespread death, destruction, and terrorization of millions upon millions of the Earth's inhabitants. What makes this case particularly interesting is Chambers' legal strategy. He argued that the court itself already acknowledges the existence of God. For example, courts have allowed "In God We Trust" to be printed on our currency, and "Under God" to be part of our Pledge of Allegiance in schools, and witnesses who take the stand are frequently sworn in on a Bible. If courts take God's existence as a given, and God is supposed to be omniscient, then God would already have notice of the lawsuit without the need for traditional service of process. Chambers, a law school graduate and long-serving state senator, didn't actually expect to win the lawsuit. His true goal was to make a point about the legal system. Contrary to some media reports, Chambers wasn't protesting frivolous lawsuits. Instead, he aimed to demonstrate that the courthouse doors should be open to everyone, regardless of how unusual their claim might be. The case sparked significant public interest and even prompted some unexpected responses. A lawyer from Corpus Christi, Texas, filed a motion to answer on God's behalf. Another response, claiming to be from God himself, was filed in Douglas County, Nebraska District Court, though its true source remained unclear. Despite Chambers' creative arguments, the case faced the same challenges as other lawsuits against supernatural beings. In 2008, a judge dismissed the case, citing the inability to serve notice to God due to his lack of a fixed address. Undeterred, Chambers appealed to the Nebraska Supreme Court. Ultimately, on February 25, 2009, the Nebraska Court of Appeals dismissed the appeal and vacated the order of the district court. The court's reasoning was that it only decides real controversies and determines rights actually controverted, and does not address abstract questions or issues that might arise in hypothetical or fictitious situations. While Chambers' lawsuit against God didn't succeed in the traditional sense, it certainly succeeded in sparking discussion about the nature of our legal system and its ability to address claims involving supernatural entities. It serves as a vivid reminder that in the face of forces beyond our comprehension, humans will always seek ways to assert control, find meaning, or simply make a point. Speaking of litigation meant to make a point, we turn to our final case in 2016, when Indian lawyer Chandan Kumar Singh decided to sue the Hindu god Rama for mistreating his wife, the goddess Sita. This case, filed in a court in Bihar, India, raised eyebrows and sparked controversy across the country. Singh's complaint centered on a well-known episode from the Ramayana, one of Hinduism's most revered epics. According to the ancient text, After rescuing Sita from the demon king, Ravana, Rama asked her to prove her purity. Singh argued that this act constituted disrespect and mistreatment of women, an issue he believed needed to be addressed even in divine matters. The lawyer's motivation stemmed from a desire to highlight women's rights issues in modern India. Singh explained to the BBC, "I filed the case because we cannot talk about respecting women in modern-day India when we know that one of our most revered gods did not treat his own wife with respect." However, the court swiftly dismissed the case, deeming it impractical. The case also sparked intense debate and backlash. Some of Singh's colleagues accused him of seeking publicity, and one even sued him for defamation. Ranjan Kumar Singh, another lawyer, told the BBC that the plea insulted Hindus and that some attorneys had asked India's Bar Council to revoke Chandan Kumar Singh's license to practice. Despite the controversy, Chandan maintained that his intentions were not to offend religious sentiments, but to seek justice for women. This case highlights the complex intersection of law, religion, and social issues in India. It demonstrates the challenges of using the legal system to address perceived injustices in religious texts and traditions, especially in a country with deeply rooted religious beliefs. It also raised interesting questions about the role of religious narratives in shaping societal attitudes towards women, and the extent to which ancient texts should be subject to modern interpretations and legal scrutiny. While none of these plaintiffs managed to drag a deity or demon into court successfully, these cases raise fascinating questions about the nature of modern legal systems and their ability to address claims involving amorphous supernatural entities. As legal scholar Naomi Mezzi notes, there's nothing in the basic requirements of a complaint that explicitly prevents suing God or other supernatural beings. The real challenges arise in meeting the procedural requirements, such as establishing jurisdiction and serving notice. The issue of personal jurisdiction is particularly intriguing when it comes to omnipresent beings. As Mezzi points out, if you believe that God is everywhere, then questions of jurisdiction are at least up for debate. The deity, one could argue, has at least minimum contact with every state and county in the nation. These cases also highlight the importance of proper service of process in the American legal system. This requirement becomes particularly challenging when dealing with supernatural defendants who lack a physical address, but this is nonetheless an important aspect of our legal system that supports the right of defendants to be given some kind of notice about the proceedings against them in a timely manner. The question of standing is another crucial legal hurdle in these cases. For a plaintiff to have standing, they must demonstrate that they have suffered a concrete and particularized injury that is fairly traceable to the defendant's conduct. In cases against supernatural beings, establishing this causal link can be particularly challenging. The harms suffered by the plaintiff must have been proximately caused by the entity in question. Mere actual causation is not enough. We might consider the analogy of someone who sues the mother of a murderer for causing a murder to occur. There is a causal chain in question, i.e., if the mother had not given birth, the murderer would not have been born and would not have been able to murder someone. There is no proximate causation here, though. These cases also challenge our understanding of the separation of church and state. When courts are asked to rule on the actions of deities, they risk entangling themselves in religious matters, potentially violating the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. Even if procedural hurdles could be overcome, there's still the question of enforceability. Quoting Mezzi again, "You can win a lawsuit, but then you need to get that lawsuit enforced." Courts and plaintiffs alike should not hold their breath. While these lawsuits against supernatural beings may seem frivolous on the surface, they can serve an important function in testing the limits of our legal system and prompting us to consider fundamental questions about justice, responsibility, free will, and the nature of reality itself. If an omnipotent being is responsible for everything, how can we assign blame or seek redress for specific harms? Conversely, if humans have free will, can we hold a deity responsible for our actions or their consequences? At the same time, one might ask, at least in relation to American law, if we are willing to embrace citizens united and the idea of companies being people, why not extend that legal fiction to deities and supernatural entities? As we wrap up this episode of the Dark Docket, I encourage you to ponder these questions. Also, consider the other ways in which our legal system and society at large invokes supernatural entities in other circumstances. For example, witnesses who are sworn in with their hand on a holy book, or courthouses that display the Ten Commandments. Arguably, as man's reach always exceeds his grasp, the legal system sometimes must grapple with cases involving forces that lie outside the realm of conventional jurisprudence, highlighting the tension between human legal constructs and the ineffable nature of supernatural beings. Thank you for joining us for our examination of more paranormal precedents. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the Dark Docket on whatever venue you tune in on. If you know of any interesting legal cases that involve the supernatural or the strange, please feel free to write to us at darkdocket@gmail.com. Join us next time as we continue to navigate the complex intersection of law and the supernatural. Until then, remember, if you plan on suing the devil, you might want to consider how many lawyers he has on retainer.